history is often written by the victors, leaving the voices of the vulnerable buried beneath the headlines of triumph. In 1945, as World War II came to an end, hundreds of thousands of American troops landed on the shores of Japan. But behind the official narrative of a peaceful transition and reconstruction lies a dark, deeply suppressed chapter. For decades, a strict wall of military censorship and profound cultural stigma silenced thousands of Japanese women. What was hidden were first-hand testimonies and shocking accounts, stories so brutal that even many historians have avoided discussing them openly. The Battle of Okinawa, the horrifying fate of Okinawan women. By 1945, the Pacific War had entered its final and most destructive stage. After years of brutal island campaigns across the Pacific Ocean, American military forces were steadily advancing closer to the Japanese mainland. The fighting had already demonstrated the extraordinary intensity of the conflict between Japan and the United States. Battles throughout the Pacific were marked by high casualty rates, mass bombardment, and an atmosphere of hatred and dehumanization on both sides. As American troops captured more Japanese-held territory, millions of Japanese civilians increasingly feared what would happen if Allied soldiers reached Japan itself. The Japanese government repeatedly circulated propaganda warning that defeat would lead to widespread sexual assault and murder of Japanese women by Allied troops. These claims were used to reinforce demands for total resistance, including orders that soldiers and civilians in invaded areas fight to the death or take their own lives rather than surrender. Japanese soldiers were issued cyanide tablets and grenades with orders to end their lives rather than be captured. One Japanese soldier later recalled,
"We were told that if anyone was wounded in the stomach, there was no hope. I remember one soldier who was badly wounded in the stomach. Another soldier tried to carry him back to safety, but the wounded man detonated his grenade. He took his own life and that of the soldier trying to save him."
One soldier named Yamamoto was hit by an artillery shell and wounded in 14 places. His hand was badly mangled, and he feared gangrene would set in. Knowing he was going to die if he did nothing, he made a desperate decision.
"I knew I would die. At 6 p.m., I got out of the hole, took my sword. My arm was no longer on me. I had bandaged it so tightly that I barely felt any pain."
One survivor, Kamida, recalled,
"I was told if we were captured, we would be cruelly treated by the Americans, and I firmly believed that. I begged for a grenade, and they finally gave me one. I put it in my medical kit. I wanted to die when the time came. It was an honor to die for your country. Everyone said, never be a prisoner. Everyone thought that way."
She further described a moment when American troops reportedly approached to within about 100 yards of her cave.
"I cannot go farther. This is my place to die. I opened my medical kit to find my grenade, but it wasn't there. My mother said, 'Your father took it away.' I shouted at him, but all he would say is that life is a treasure. By throwing out my grenade, he saved my life."
A survivor, who later became a reverend and a professor at a Christian junior college, described a deeply traumatic incident during the Battle of Okinawa on Tokashikijima Island. He recalled that as US soldiers approached their home, his mother panicked. In the chaos and fear of the moment, he struck her with a rock. Speaking to the Daily Yomiuri, he said he believed they were expected to take each other's lives somehow, and that no grenades or firearms were available at the time. He further stated that after his mother's death, he and his brother went on to take the lives of their younger siblings. Following these events, he reportedly confronted American soldiers with only a stick, expecting that he would be killed in the encounter. On Saipan in July 1944, during the US invasion, large numbers of Japanese civilians took their own lives. most notably at a site later known as Banzai Cliff. On Kurama Island, 171 out of 360 civilian casualties were attributed to such fate. One survivor recounted that he took refuge in a shelter where he witnessed a school principal take the life of his wife with the use of a razor, before using the same razor to take his own life, with blood reportedly spreading among the survivors present. He also described other cases in which people took their own lives using grenades, including one incident where a grenade explosion killed a survivor's sister. He himself escaped with his mother, who was trying to flee both approaching American forces and the chaos carried out by Japanese civilians and soldiers. One survivor described how his grandfather tried to take the lives of his whole family rather than let them be captured. In the end, only his young son was killed. Despite this unimaginable tragedy, the grandfather and grandmother remained married for the rest of their lives, though the wife would sometimes, through a damaged throat, call him a murderer. Some survivors also alleged that Japanese military personnel were directly involved, stating that soldiers distributed grenades to civilians for the purpose of self-destruction. It has further been noted in these accounts that such mass events tended to occur primarily in villages where Japanese troops were stationed. While the demonization of US troops by the Japanese was used as propaganda, it could be argued the expectation of a violent fate was in some cases justified. Okinawan historian Oshiro Masayasu writes,
"Soon after the US Marines landed, all the women of a village on Motobu Peninsula fell into the hands of American soldiers. At the time, there were only women, children, and old people in the village, as all the young men had been mobilized for the war. Soon after landing, the Marines mopped up the entire village, but found no signs of Japanese forces. Taking advantage of the situation, they started hunting for women in broad daylight, and those who were hiding in the village or nearby air raid shelters were dragged out one after another."
According to historian Toshiyuki Tanaka, 76 cases of sexual assault or sexual assault and murder were officially reported in Okinawa during the first 5 years of American occupation. However, he argues that this number likely represents only a fraction of the actual incidents, as many cases went unreported due to social stigma, fear, and the absence of reliable reporting systems in the immediate post-war period. George Pfeiffer's book, Tenozan, The Battle of Okinawa and the Atomic Bomb, and other works document multiple cases of sexual assaults in caves and abandoned areas. Soldiers sometimes separated women from families at gunpoint. During the Battle of Okinawa, many civilians sought shelter in caves after their homes and schools were destroyed. One survivor, Chio Kamieda, who was 16 years old at the time, described the extremely difficult conditions inside one of these caves. She recalled the overwhelming stench and the suffering of the wounded who were brought inside. Many of them gradually grew weaker, eventually losing the strength even to drink water. Tragically, Chio's father was shot and killed while he left the cave to search for water. She later reflected that she wanted to believe the Japanese soldier who fired had done so by mistake. Another survivor, a young boy, witnessed the heartbreaking toll the fighting took on families. He described how a woman was killed by a shell fragment outside a cave because there was no space left inside. Her 2 young children were left beside her. Days later, he found them still there, having endured the rain and the elements. In another account, Kamieda and her mother came out after a bomb was thrown in her cave, killing many of the soldiers there.
"I crawled to the feet of a huge American. He had no shirt on. He had a full beard and was sunburned all over. It was exactly the image of the red devil we Japanese had feared, but he turned out to be a gentle red devil. He offered me his canteen. I was so thirsty, but I thought it was poison. I said in English, 'No thank you,' but he understood my thoughts. He drank from it first, and then I willingly drank, and so did my mother."
87 out of the 150 Okinawan civilians hiding in Chibichirigama, a 100-foot-deep limestone cave, ended up ending their lives. It all began on the 2nd of April, 1945. As American soldiers approached the cave, 2 boys charged at them with nothing but bamboo spears. The soldiers opened fire. Hoping to avoid more tragedy, the Americans pleaded with the civilians to come out peacefully and even dropped leaflets promising they wouldn't be harmed. But the people inside didn't believe them. Then, in the darkness of the cave, panic took over. One witness recalled an 18-year-old girl desperately pleading with her mother not to let the American soldiers capture her. Soon after, many families inside the cave began taking their own lives in a tragic chain reaction. Parents began causing harm before turning the weapons on themselves. They kept coming back. Unspeakable incidents in Okinawa. Just after the United States secured victory in the brutal Battle of Okinawa, 3 American Marines stationed on the island disappeared. The Marine Corps initially listed the 3 soldiers, each 19 years old and African American, as possible deserters in the summer of 1945. A year later, with no further information available, their status was changed to missing in action. For more than 50 years, the case faded from public attention. Then, in 1998, local police, acting on a tip, uncovered human remains in a cave north of a resort town, later confirmed to belong to the 3 Marines. After extensive examination, the remains were returned to the United States, where they were buried by their families. However, the discovery did not resolve the mystery of their disappearance. Instead, it revived long-standing tensions and resentment in parts of Okinawa regarding the conduct of American troops during the post-battle period. Some elderly Okinawan residents living near the site later came forward with accounts of a long-suppressed local story. According to these testimonies, a group of villagers may have ambushed and killed the 3 men after mistakenly identifying them as soldiers who had allegedly been involved in repeated sexual assaults in the area. While elements of these local accounts are consistent with broader recollections of the period, there is no confirmed evidence that these specific Marines committed any such crimes. Likewise, although there is strong indication that the villagers may have been responsible for the killings, the exact circumstances remain unverified. The case has nonetheless drawn renewed attention to what some historians describe as a frequently overlooked aspect of the post-battle occupation: allegations of widespread sexual violence against Okinawan women by members of the US military. In separate interviews with the New York Times, elderly Okinawans who had grown up in the same village stated that, following the US victory in the battle, 3 armed Marines allegedly visited Katsuyama each weekend. According to their accounts, the soldiers would compel local men to guide them to village women, who were then taken into the surrounding hills and sexually assaulted. According to the villagers' accounts, the Marines reportedly became so confident that they sometimes entered Katsuyama unarmed. One day, the villagers, allegedly assisted by 2 armed Japanese soldiers who had been hiding in the jungle, set up an ambush in a narrow, dark mountain pass near a river. The soldiers were said to have opened fire from the bushes, while dozens of villagers attacked the Marines with sticks and stones, ultimately killing them. I didn't see the actual killing because I was hiding in the mountains above, but I heard 5 or 6 gunshots and then a lot of footsteps and commotion, said Shinsei Higa, a 71-year-old retired teacher who was 16 at the time. By late afternoon, we came down from the mountains and then everyone knew what had happened. Fearing that other American forces might come searching for the missing Marines, the villagers reportedly disposed of the bodies in a hillside cave with a 50-foot drop just inside the entrance. According to local accounts, they also agreed to keep the incident secret and never speak about it to outsiders. Kijun Kishimoto, an 84-year-old retired school principal who was raised in Katsuyama, said he was away from the village at the time of the killings. However, he stated that he later learned about the incident from his brother and niece.
People were very afraid that if the Americans found out what happened, there would be retaliation, so they decided to keep it a secret to protect those involved.
US military officials stated that, based on dental record analysis, the remains recovered from the cave were positively identified as those of the 3 missing Marines, all of whom were African American. According to an article in Stars and Stripes, a sense of guilt eventually led an Okinawan man to contact Setsuko Inafuku, a tour guide at Kadena Air Base, who had previously assisted in recovering the remains of wartime dead. Inafuku said in an interview that she and the man began searching for the cave in June 1997, but were initially unsuccessful. She added that a typhoon in August brought down a tree that had been concealing the entrance, allowing them to finally locate it. Marine Corps officials later stated that the US military did not intend to launch a criminal investigation, as the remains were discovered off a military installation and therefore fell under the jurisdiction of the Okinawa Prefectural Police. The Prefectural Police, in turn, indicated that no investigation would be pursued, citing the expiration of the statute of limitations. After Japan surrendered in September 1945, US troops remained as an occupying force. During this time, incidents of sexual assault against Japanese women continued. In just the first 10 days in Kanagawa Prefecture alone, over 1,300 cases were reported, and many more likely went unreported. The situation became so severe that the Japanese government created the Recreation and Amusement Association, a network of brothels designed to serve Allied soldiers. These facilities employed tens of thousands of women. While the brothels were operating, reported assaults dropped sharply, but when the government shut them down in early 1946, the number of assaults surged again, rising dramatically from about 40 to over 300 per day, according to historian John W. Dower. Japanese civilians were sentenced to hard labor for spreading rumors derogatory to occupation forces when they spoke about American soldiers committing sexual assaults against Japanese women. Historian Takamae Eiji also documented this policy, noting how the occupation authorities strictly punished any Japanese people who reported or discussed such incidents. One Okinawan historian has estimated that as many as 10,000 local women may have been sexually assaulted in the aftermath of the fighting. It has even been claimed that by the year 2000, the vast majority of Okinawans over the age of 65 either knew a victim personally or had heard stories of women who were assaulted after the battle. US military officials, however, stated in year 2000 that they found no evidence of widespread or systematic assaults. Members of the British Commonwealth Occupation Force, which included Australian, British, Indian, and New Zealand troops, were also involved in cases of sexual assault during the occupation of Japan. According to official BCOF reports, their personnel were convicted of 57 sexual assaults between May 1946 and December 1947, with another 23 convictions from January 1948 to September 1951. No detailed official records exist for serious crimes committed during the first 3 months of the occupation. Australian historian Robin Gerster notes that these official figures likely understate the true scale of offences. A former Japanese woman who worked in Kura recalled the fear that gripped the local population.
Most people in Kura stayed inside their homes and tried to ignore what was happening. The Australian soldiers were the worst. They would drag young women into their jeeps. I heard screams for help almost every night.
She explained that local police eventually asked women working in brothels to serve the occupation troops, hoping this would protect younger women from assault. She and others agreed, describing it as acting like a firebreak. Australian officer Alan Clifton, who served as an interpreter and criminal investigator, described one particularly disturbing case in his 1951 book, Time of Fallen Blossoms. He recounted visiting a hospital in Hiroshima where a young Japanese woman was being treated after being assaulted by a large group of Australian soldiers. Clifton also wrote about the challenges of military justice. In one assault case witnessed by several soldiers, the accused was found guilty at a court-martial and sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, when the case was sent back to Australia for confirmation, the conviction was quashed due to what authorities called insufficient evidence. While serious cases that were reported were usually investigated by BCOF military police, the punishments handed out were often relatively light. Many convictions involving Australian soldiers were later reduced or overturned by Australian courts. Gerster argues that sexual assaults by Australian troops were relatively common, influenced by certain attitudes toward Japan and a desire for revenge over Japanese wartime actions. This behavior contributed to the BCOF developing a reputation as the least disciplined of the Allied occupation forces. Today, about half of all US military personnel stationed in Japan are based in Okinawa. According to the figures, there were 55,026 American military personnel in Japan, with 25,843 of them located in Okinawa, accounting for 47% of the total. Even after Okinawa was returned to Japanese control in 1972, US military personnel, their families, and dependents continued to be involved in criminal incidents on the islands. According to statistics from the Okinawa Prefectural Police, by September 2020, a total of 6,052 criminal offenses had been recorded involving US servicemen, servicewomen, and their families. Out of these, 581 were serious violent crimes such as murder, robbery, sexual assault, and arson. 129 of the cases were sexual assaults. These figures only reflect the number of arrests made. Many believe the actual number of incidents is significantly higher. One of the most infamous incidents occurred in 1995. On September 4th of that year, 3 US servicemen, a Navy seaman, and 2 Marines stationed at Camp Hansen abducted an Okinawan schoolgirl. They forced her into a rented vehicle and assaulted her before abandoning her on a remote road. The case sparked widespread outrage across Okinawa. It led to massive protests against the heavy US military presence on the islands, with tens of thousands of locals demanding justice and a reduction in American bases. The incident also highlighted long-standing tensions over the status of forces agreement and crimes committed by US personnel. The 3 servicemen were eventually convicted in Japanese court. The case remains a painful symbol for many Okinawans of the issues surrounding the large-scale American military footprint in the prefecture, even decades later. Even today, more than half a century after Okinawa's reversion to Japan, incidents of sexual violence by US personnel continue in Okinawa, which still hosts the largest concentration of American military bases in the Far East.